of the UVF. So if IRA violence was to start in some shape or form again, you might see unilateral action by either the UDA or UVF, but that's the only probably way it could happen.
Okay.
The cost of the CLMC is not as significant as people think it is.
Okay, Henry McDowell, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Now, you might remember that at the heart of the Beef Tribunal, there was a question: why did government policy on financing beef exports change so dramatically? What had ministers said to each other? Immediately, the then Attorney General, Harry Whelan, objected. He took the issue to the High Court and on to the Supreme Court, and they upheld his view. There could be no questions about what ministers discussed in government. Cabinet confidentiality was said to be absolute. Next Thursday's referendum proposes to maintain that principle with just two exceptions. One, in the interests of the administration of justice by a court. Two, following an application by a tribunal appointed by the government on the authority of the Oireachtas. And in both of those cases, exceptions require that the High Court certify that the information about discussions in government can be disclosed. Those in favour of a yes vote start by outlining their very present position. Because of the Supreme Court ruling in the Beef Tribunal case, there's a veil of secrecy over all cabinet discussions. Courts and tribunals, like the new payments for politicians inquiries, won't be able to work properly. Only the people's vote will allow these inquiries to work. Those in favour of a yes vote say it's needed to protect full and frank discussion in government, in particular allowing ministers to argue forcibly for policies that mightn't suit their particular constituencies. And they also want the convention of confidentiality enshrined in the Constitution. And they argue that, especially because coalition governments are commonplace, it's important to protect government decisions from party point scoring. On the other side of the no vote, there are two main lines of argument. One says no change is necessary at all. The other says these proposals are much too narrow. Now, those arguing against any change say even the current proposals could curb proper discussion, that the courts aren't the best judges of whether it's in the public interest to lift the veil. They say if there is a difficulty at the moment, for instance, because of the new tribunals, then either appeal the matter again to the Supreme Court or bring in laws to regulate matters. The other main arguments in favour of a no vote oppose this proposal because it's too narrow. They say it's not enough to limit disclosures to the courts and tribunals. It's illogical, they say, that the government itself should limit its own right to speak out. And they say all kinds of proper exceptions, from, say, ministers explaining their resignations to writing their memoirs, are simply not allowed for. And they point out that Taoiseach Bertie Ahern has admitted in the Dáil that this proposal is inadequate. These are the bare bones of the major arguments. On the one hand, we need this amendment, otherwise the new tribunals won't be able to work properly. On the other hand, we don't need any amendment at all, or else this particular proposal is too narrow and inadequate. A man with experience, the Attorney General who brought the whole issue right up to the Supreme Court, Harry Whelan, made these observations to Michael Heaney.
The arguments in favour of the amendment are very good, and the terms of the amendment are very good. But the question is really whether the status quo, that is to say the provision under the Constitution as it stands and as it has been declared by the Supreme Court, is one which should be tampered with, whether there is justification for tampering with it. And that is the first question, I think, that you should come to. But certainly I would come...
Well, on that point then, you appear to be unhappy that this constitutional principle of cabinet confidentiality is being sacrificed as that's the word that you use in today's paper.
Yes, yes, but in today's paper, and it has always been my view since this decision was announced by the Supreme Court, that the way in which the effect of the Supreme Court decision has been presented is very inaccurate, very unfair, and tends to suggest that it is a very draconian decision and prevents the public from knowing how the government operates and the information on which it decides. What I said was sinister was the extent to which I think you and your colleagues in the media, I shouldn't say you, but the media in general, and those who strongly feel that the principle shouldn't exist of cabinet confidentiality, have tended to suggest that the Supreme Court decision was extremely restrictive and deprived the public of the right to know what the government was doing. That is incorrect.
Why is it what's sinister?
Well,
about that?
it's sinister because if anybody, including yourselves and the print media, had taken the trouble to read the judgments of the Supreme Court, which are in very simple, clear language, it would be self-evident and is expressly stated that the limitations imposed by the principle relate only to the discussions in government, that you can publish everything that goes into the government and everything that comes out, even informal decisions of the government.
Nonetheless, the people are facing a decision, yes or no, on this referendum next week. Is it a fair summary of your position to say that you feel there is not any significant or real need to change the status quo on absolute confidentiality?
That would be my strong conviction, based not just on my own personal view, but on the decisions of the judges of the Supreme Court, whose function it is to give efficacy and meaning to the Constitution, have clearly decided emphatically that it is necessary for the government, as a necessary concomitant of proper democratic government of the kind we have, collective responsibility, that there should be an absolute prohibition on the disclosure of discussions at cabinet meetings.
You appear to be very unhappy with the role of the media in this whole matter, and indeed of the politicians, almost disdainful. Would that be fair?
Well, I think I would settle for being disappointed, I think, is the word I used. And again, you apply a stronger word. And perhaps if you were to scratch the surface, you might be correct. I do feel that the media have been very remiss in this, because I can remember well there was a massive head of steam built up about this case when it arose. And there was a great deal of comment about it afterwards. But in the intervening time, no attempt has been made to actually educate people as to the limits of the principle and the effect of it.
It appears to me that your position is you would prefer if this amendment was not in front of the people. Yet, you do say in this article that the amendment, the proposal, is not an unreasonable one, and would prevent a recurrence of the dilemma faced by the Beef Tribunal.
That is a fair summary of my position, but I never wanted to be put in the position of having to defend the principle. I was Attorney General, it was my function to do it. I didn't invent cabinet confidentiality. I argued for it because it is implicit in the Constitution and it was my function to do it. I developed some conviction about the arguments that I had to make when I was Attorney General, and I still hold those convictions.
But what does it all add up to today for Harry Whelan? Are you in favour or against this amendment?
Well, I'm a private citizen and I'm voting. I've one vote. I'm not a politician and I'm not trying to persuade anybody. But I do think that those who feel comfortable, if anybody has read my article, which I think does set out reasonably and fairly and in a logical way, if I might be so bold as to say, something which has not been done before, the arguments in favour of the principle, I think people can make an educated judgment. And whichever way they vote, I think not a great deal of damage will be done. But I would urge caution, and I think people should be very careful before they vote.
Well, beside the legal arguments, there are political issues directly involved in this referendum. And to spell out the detail of the arguments on both sides, I'm joined by Martin Cullen, Minister of State at the Department of Finance, and by former PD spokesperson Michael McDowell, who's also a senior counsel. Minister Cullen, what about the argument we don't need it at all?
Well, I don't accept that, and I think the programme in your introduction clearly outlined the reasons why, as a result of what occurred through the McCracken Tribunal and the report that came out afterwards. We now have the Moriarty Tribunal and indeed a planning tribunal set up, and it's clear that if we want to get the openness and the transparency and all of the issues dealt with in a way that will give full meaning to the public concern and the issues, to have them fully resolved in an open manner.
So you believe that in regard to both these tribunals, something was said at Cabinet not in any other place. You believe you need access to cabinet discussions specifically, do you?
I think that'll be a matter for the
Does that
tribunal.
make sense
It's
to you?
possible. It's possible that would be the case. I think as arising out of what
Ministers
happened.
saying to each other across the table, we're on the fiddle, we're on the tape.
No, and I don't think, Brian, I think nobody is suggesting that is the sort of tenor of discussion that occurs at a cabinet table where you have an Attorney General sitting, or indeed ministers. I mean, that takes the exaggerated view, which we all know in our hearts and souls simply does not occur. But I think we've got to put the thing in context, and that's what this referendum will do in allowing a full and proper tribunal to take place, in two tribunals to take place. And it is needed to create the two conditions why that full investigation can take place.
Why not appeal the whole matter once again to the Supreme Court? The Supreme Court was only a 3-2 judgment. It could reverse itself.
Well, I don't accept the argument, whether it's a 3-2 or 4-2. We have a decision, and I think we're to base all court decisions on, a narrow majority and start questioning. We're going nowhere. The reason is a government is not in a position to knowingly bring in legislation that they know must be referred to the Supreme Court. No Attorney General can allow such a situation to occur. So that's not a way that we can proceed. We must proceed in the manner that is doing. And that's the view of many Attorneys General.
Overall, Michael McDowell, they can't get out of it, so here's the referendum.
Well, that's not right that they can't get out of it. I mean, for instance, in relation to bail, they tried to persuade the Supreme Court to reverse itself, and there's plenty of precedent for the government running something by way of legislation which is arguable one way or the other by reference to previous decisions of the Supreme Court on the basis that they assume that the Supreme Court will pay attention to the views of the Oireachtas. But the real question with this referendum is that it is not a question of half a loaf being better than none. My opposition to it, and that of a number of other people who have spoken out publicly against it, and those who have written about it, and those who have written our major constitutional textbooks about this issue, is not that this referendum is too narrowly cast. It proposes to put into the Constitution an absolute rule of confidentiality with two exceptions. In other words, in order to get the two exceptions, you have to buy the whole idea of Harry Wheelahan's notion of absolute confidentiality. So you're being asked to give away the principle that he argued for in order to save from it two exceptions. Now, I believe that is entirely wrong. The Taoiseach has conceded in the Dáil that the wording he has is inadequate. There's been mutterings here and there, that they're going to come back with another referendum, or they'll send it to the Committee on the Constitution and review the issue. But that's an elastoplast approach to the issue.
Is it at all clear? Are you confident that when the Supreme Court made its mind up about this, that they actually knew how government operates, that they knew, for instance, under the government procedure instructions, that a minister was designated to go out and tell the media what had been going on?
I think they had no doubt in their mind that the principle of absolute confidentiality underpins, in fact, the democracy that exists and the right of government to govern at that level. And I don't accept what Michael is saying in the way that he's put these points across. I think there is a clear way forward, and it is not true to say that the Taoiseach has admitted or stated in the Dáil that this is inadequate. What he in fact has said is this is a clear way forward if it is proved and shown in time that there is another difficulty.
Because he did defer to opposition deputies, saying he was persuaded in part along that direction.
He did. He said, I think we better be absolutely clear on this so that we don't get confusion into debate. What he said was that as far as he was concerned, this was the way forward, and that if it was shown, which he had a severe doubt about, that somehow in the future that another matter might arise that would need a further looking at this, he referred the matter where the Constitution Review Group is in fact sitting and looking at a range of matters that perhaps in that context it could be looked at. But there's no lack of certainty with regard to the Taoiseach and the government.
Michael McDowell, you're not saying there shouldn't be cabinet confidentiality.
No,
you're objecting to making
not.
It an absolute
You see, every Western democracy in the world, and in non-Western democracies too, with a cabinet government, has a convention of confidentiality. There's no argument on that. But no other country anywhere in the world, and I defy Martin to contradict me on this, has written into its constitution a set of rules which, such as we are now going to do, because it shouldn't be in the constitution. And no other country has stated that in its written constitution that the discussions at cabinet are absolutely confidential. There are many precedents in Westminster, in other Western democracies, for exceptions to the rule. A minister resigning is always entitled to give the reason why he resigned.
Taoiseach opened the door himself in saying he knew something about previous discussions
That's
in
right.
government.
Yeah,
He
well,
knew about the number of drafts we'd had on this.
But I think there's an important point here, and Michael is trying to convey a view that somehow there's an archive in existence of all discussions where
I'm
there
not
is no. But
suggesting
just
that.
let me finish, Michael. Where there is no written record on the matter. But all government decisions, or indeed memorandum to
Well, could we
government
cut
or
this?
aid,
Because we've gone through this and
but
we
no,
know
but can I
this.
just say,
I
a
think-
minister is entitled, Brian. I want to be clear on this. If he is resigning, to come out and state on the point that he's resigning on, there is no preclusion or no barring of any minister who is resigning from making his
What
position
about a
clear
minister
on the
writing
basis of a
memoirs after the
decision.
event? What about a historian writing about events of 50 years ago?
A minister is quite entitled to write memoirs,
Well,
and I'm
that's-
sure they.
well,
No,
with-
just
with
hold a minute,
respect, Martin, that is not so.
Michael, he is not entitled. Hold on a minute. He is not entitled, in the context of memoirs, to attribute specific points made by individual ministers
what is
across
the
the
harm
table.
of saying 15, 20, 30 years ago, I took a certain view, two of my colleagues at that table, and naming those colleagues, took a different view?
Well, that's Brian, can I make this point to you? That is precisely what, for instance, Richard Crossman did in England. And the Attorney General of England brought his publishers, Jonathan Cape, to the English courts to try and stop them from publishing this material. And the English court said, no, this is not an absolute rule, and in any event, it's now 10 years gone, and we won't give you any injunction. Harry Whelan now is posing as being sweetness and light on the intro film there. But can I make this point to you? He has advocated, since the passing of since the Supreme Court ruling, that journalists should be prosecuted criminally if they publish
Minister, I'm going to give you the last half second.
Michael well knows that all cabinet papers, all matters pertaining, are under the 30-year rule, available anyway in the public domain after 30
That's not
years.
so.
And that is the case, Michael. And you know,
won't be
unless
so in
where
the
it
future.
impinges where there is a matter of serious official secrets involved, and you know that as well as I do. And that's
Minister
the way
Martin
we've
Cullen,
always proceeded.
Michael McDowell, thank you for being with us.
That's all from us for tonight. We'll be back on Tuesday when there's a special primetime debate involving all 5 presidential candidates. But for tonight, from Brian, myself and everyone on the programme, good night.
Bank Holiday Monday on RTE1. A movie to take you to the edge and beyond.
He is an Iceman. No! He is a monster.
You think I killed my wife?
Let's say the son of a bitch didn't do it.
If you didn't do it, I'll get him off.
If I was going to kill my wife, that's the way I'd do it.
I want you to look as though your life has been shattered.
My life has been shattered. I'm giving you a chance to cop a plea.
It's my life. You can't. I didn't kill her.
Jagged Edge, Bank Holiday Monday at 11 on RTE1.
The Pope's political ambitions thwarted by revolution. Next on One, Anthony Clare narrates Saints and Sinners.
Introducing Glade Essence of Nature candles with special blends of fragrances inspired by nature. Create relaxing moods with peach. Fragrant spring potpourri. And inviting magnolia and vanilla. Essence of Nature candles. Created by nature. Captured by Glade.
A year we must remember. Who fears to speak? The hopes and heroes. The songs of '98 in an epic new recording. Liam Clancy leads an all-star cast in Who Fears to Speak.
Hey, look, honey!
Yeah, let's get stuck in.
Help! Get them stuck into some fun with Kellogg's Rice Krispies.
The first, the second, and the last number you should call for cheaper motor insurance. First call direct, 1-850 48 48 48.
No idea what to eat? Try this for a late treat. cheese it into something special.
We've had a great few years. It's never been busier. If we want to stay in front, we've got to build on the strengths that we have. We already reach 85% of senior business people, but the business world is changing and we've got to change with it. So we're expanding.
Friday Business in the Irish Times, now in 2 sections. Business This Week 1 and Business This Week 2, which has all the best jobs.
For the October sale, this video is 169.
Try 139.
This Mitsubishi TV is 179.
Actually, it's 149.
This CD stereo is 79.
Sorry, 49.
There's £100 scrappage on this Philips Nicam stereo TV.
Got it in one.
That's even lower prices now at Paris City.
Is that the best you can do?
It's only a letter.
You're not trying. See how interesting you could make it.
That looks complicated.
It's easy. Now, shall we email it?
I don't know how.
Look, why don't you get PC Know-How? It tells you how to create birthday cards, how to edit your family photos, how to do everything. And every week there are step-by-step projects to practice on. With PC Know-How, you might surprise me.
I will.
On Nationwide tomorrow evening, Winning Streak and the winning housewife who can teach you how to win the cars and holidays. That's Nationwide tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock.
This Saturday, Network 2 screens a tribute to the Cork-born jazz and classical musician, performer and composer, Robert Lamb.
There was a man who lived in Barrack Street, used to teach at Greenmount School. His name was Barney O'Toole. He could see something in me which I couldn't see at the time. He saw that there was a flair or a love of music which I did not know I had. You know, you can play whatever on the trombone, but there's something else as well, isn't there?
Family.
Yep. Is that what it's called? Family?
Yep.
My God.
Family.
Bobby Lamb, a celebration by John Lynch. Saturday at 10 to 10 on Network 2.
In the age of reason, knowing when to doff your hat was a matter of life and death.